We are Makilala TV, the first Filipino-American TV talk show in the New York metro area. Get to know us as we talk to the community leaders, innovators, advocates, and emerging artists who affect Filipino-American life. There has been a rising uptick in anti-Asian discrimination across the nation, but especially in New York City, which is also the epicenter of the COVID-19 public health crisis. The New York City Commission on Human Rights has created a COVID-19 response team, which has tracked hundreds of instances of discrimination, with more than 100 of them having an anti-Asian component. But what actually happens once someone files a complaint or report to the city? Is it just paperwork, or are there arrests being made and people being held accountable? How do we prevent more of these cases from happening? And what is the commission doing to make sure that the Asian American community is being heard and taken seriously? During this episode of Makilala TV, I, Rachelle Ocampo, am joined with my co-host Jen Fuhrer, hailing from New Jersey, and Cristina Pastor, broadcasting from Beijing, to invite our special guest, Ms. Carmelyn P. Malalis, the chair and commissioner of the New York City Commission on Human Rights, also known as the Commission. She was appointed by Mayor Bill de Blasio in November 2014, following more than a decade in private practice as an advocate for employees' rights in the workplace. Prior to her appointment, Commissioner Malalis was a partner at Oaten and Golden LLP, where she co-founded and co-chaired its lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender workplace rights practice group. Throughout her career, Commissioner Malalis has demonstrated a fierce commitment to promoting diversity and inclusion and preventing and prosecuting discrimination and intolerance. Commissioner Malalis, it is an honor to have you join us at Makilala TV. Please tell us, how has being a Filipino influenced you to get into the world of human rights?
Thank you for that, Rachelle. I have to tell you, so I am now going into, I think, my 6th year as the chair and commissioner at the Commission on Human Rights. This is my first time working in government, and when I was, taking on this role, I felt just the great responsibility, being the daughter of immigrants, being a queer woman of color, being a Phil-Am, of really making sure that there was a place in government that was accessible to all New Yorkers, where everyone throughout the city felt as though they had somebody there speaking for them. They had an accessible way of accessing the many important basic needs that come through local government, like housing, food, education, etc. And I have to say that it is, I feel that responsibility even deeper right now at this time of pandemic, and feel incredibly privileged that I have a position that enables me to speak so loudly about what we are seeing happening with Asian Americans, including Filipinx folks, right now at this time when there has been an uptick of discrimination and harassment. And I'm in a position as the Commissioner of Human Rights to address it, to speak about it, and to speak to my fellow Asian Americans and let them know that we see them, we're standing with them, and we are working to combat it.
Commissioner, as a Filipino-American, how do you feel about this surge of anti-Asian racism tied to the coronavirus?
I mean, it's horrible, and we saw that it's really, our Asian American communities are really suffering in ways that other people, frankly, can't imagine. This is a time when I think everyone in the world, frankly, not just New York City, not just this country, is feeling an incredible amount of uncertainty. We're feeling a lot of fears for ourselves, for our children, for our elders. And the fact that Asian Americans are burdened with the additional fears of being attacked, being discriminated against, being stigmatized is unconscionable. At the commission, if I take a look at the number of complaints of anti-Asian racism or discrimination that we've seen just in the past 3 months, and I compare that to the numbers that we saw last year at the same time period, it's staggering. From February to April of this year, we've tracked over 300 COVID-related discrimination complaints, of which 121 involved some form of anti-Asian discrimination or harassment. If I compare that number, 121, to the same time period last year, there were nine such cases.
Commissioner, I probably live in a sheltered community because I don't really experience what you're talking about. Like, what kind of examples, let's say from people like me who have no idea what's going on, like give me like a set of an example so I can, educate myself.
Sure, and Jen, you actually bring up a great point. Because we are all in a shelter-in-place situation, the numbers that we are seeing are probably just skimming the surface, right? Because we are all in much more private situations than we typically are. We're not in the world as much as we are used to being. So the commission has jurisdiction everywhere in city living, in the workplace, in housing, in places of public accommodation, including also places where people are being called names out on the street, in transit stations, etc. So we are seeing things not just, in housing. There are some situations in which, landlords did not want their Asian American renters to come back to their home, fearing that because they're Asian American, that they would have COVID or they'd bring COVID into the housing situation. Same thing with places of public accommodation where stores have turned people away because they are Asian American and thinking to themselves, we don't want, this is a Chinese virus, this is an Asian virus, and so we don't want that around us. And then, of course, sadly, you're seeing some of the reports on media where we've seen some very disturbing videos of people actually being attacked, in transit or, out on the street or the sidewalk. So we're really talking about the many different ways that discrimination and harassment occur in all areas of city living.
How did somebody complain? How did someone file a complaint? How did you get all this information?
Sure. So there are very many ways. I will tell you that given my background, given my family, when I first came into the Commission on Human Rights, one of my huge priorities was making sure that we were accessible to more New Yorkers, that we were being more accessible in language and representation and otherwise to the diversity of New Yorkers. So our staff speak over 30 languages, including Tagalog. And we have outreach in many different ways, and there's multiple ways that something might reach our agency. So people can always call 311, ask for human rights, and be connected directly with us. They could call us directly at 212-416-0197. We also get a lot of referrals from the many community-based organizations we work with, or churches or other houses of worship, or sometimes we get referrals back from other elected officials. I'll also say something that is very important and something that we've very much been emphasizing right now is just because you are not yourself the victim of discrimination does not mean that you are powerless to do something against it. And so we have really been encouraging bystanders, people who are witnessing these acts, to take more action. And in the past 2 months, we've held, I think, 5 bystander intervention trainings with the Center for Anti-Violence Education, and we have several other trainings that have been scheduled for the future in other languages, so that, if you speak Mandarin, if you speak Tagalog, if you speak Korean, if you speak Japanese, and you are in community, you also know, one, how to interrupt situations that you are seeing in front of you, but also how to contact the commission to report those situations. Because I just want to add this, if you're the victim of discrimination or harassment, you're dealing with the trauma of that situation. And so it is quite often folks who are watching this happen who are better situated to notify our agency.
My question is, what response do you suggest than an Asian American take, one that is safe and one that will not escalate the situation?
You know, it really depends on the situation, and that's why we encourage folks to take a look at our bystander intervention, sign up for them. There's a lot of information that we've provided on our website. If folks go to www.nyc.gov/stop COVID hate, or they can go to /human rights, and there's a lot of information on trainings and workshops. But you know, it really depends on the situation. I will give you a personal example of something that actually happened years ago, even before I was the Commissioner of Human Rights, where I remember that I was on a subway car where two men were just, street harassing a woman who was, we were all there on the subway car, and it was a moving car. So she was basically trapped on the subway car where all these two men were harassing her. And I was watching this as a bystander, kind of in horror as this was happening, thinking, oh, what can I do to stop this? What can I do to intervene? How do I do this safely? And also probably having the same reaction that people have all the time when they're caught in these situations, like, is someone going to intervene? Is someone going to do something? And so almost kind of, just for kind of sheer instinct, what I began doing is I began just singing "You Are My Sunshine" very loudly. And it had the effect I wanted, frankly. It interrupted the situation. People were looking around like, okay, what is going on here? And as I left the subway,
people sang along with you?
No, people did not. But I will say, as I was leaving the subway car, I locked eyes with the woman and I said, are you okay? And she said, yes. And she said, thanks. But I bring up that example because depending on the situation, there's different things that you can do because you want to be safe yourself. Part of it is interrupting that, but part of it is also reporting that these things actually happen.
When you report, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's actually a good time for us to actually see two testimonials.
That's right. Yeah.
Who have come forward and shared their experience online. We are going to watch a video of Miss Deirdre, and we're also going to see another one from Miss Dorothea Gloria. So let's watch those two videos. Let's see how we can comment on them and see what we can do to help raise these issues.
Hi, so a few nights ago I was in St. Mark's Place because I wanted to go to this Israeli store that I love going to. I get my juices, I get a bunch of food there that I'm not able to get from a different grocery store. And as I was walking, I was trying to cross the street because there was this guy just screaming, "Are there any homeless people that are hungry?" And I didn't want to be in direct contact with him because he wasn't really wearing a mask, or if he was wearing a mask, but it wasn't completely on. And I just tried to cross the street so that way I wouldn't be in direct contact with him. I wanted to be safe, especially since the streets now are very isolated. And he actually wanted to come up to me and he asked if I knew of any homeless people that were hungry, and I just looked at him and said, I don't know. And then he says to me, "Oh, you're Asian. You're the one that brought coronavirus to this country. I'm going to call the police." So I would usually confront and try to educate somebody that would make that comment, but I didn't feel safe at that moment. And I also didn't want to put myself in a compromising situation, especially since the street was completely isolated. So I just walked and I tried to go to a better area that was well lit, more widespread. And I just kept thinking to myself, do I really look that Asian? Like, I know that I never have gotten this comment before or something like this because I didn't think that I looked so Asian. But I mean, I also thought that, again, it shouldn't matter whether I look Asian, because whenever somebody says something to you that is discriminatory and full of hate, it's not acceptable. So that was my experience with anti-Asian sentiments. Thank you.
I was quite shocked to experience racism during this pandemic. I was on the street and I was on my way to the bank. And while I was walking, a lady across the street started shouting. And I thought, what's happening? And then eventually I realized that this lady was shouting at me, saying that, oh, you Chinese woman, you brought the virus to this country. And then I got scared because from the other side of the street, she began to approach me, and she kept on shouting and trying to really engage. And my response was to run away. So I ran away, and even as I was running away, she was like, I know you can hear me. And it was quite jarring because I live in Astoria, which is one of the most diverse communities here in Queens. And just by looking Asian, this person already pinned that I was the cause of the quarantine and lockdown. And of course, after having that experience, I didn't go out to even try to buy essentials for a couple of days because it felt like, oh my gosh, everyone who isn't Asian or who doesn't look Asian thinks the same way as this lady. And, it's weird having that paranoia while walking outside. Like, even if they're not saying anything, it feels like, oh, they're thinking that I brought it here. I bet. Like, that's how it affected me and my thinking. It got me more paranoid. So yeah, that was my experience of racism. For the first time, I don't think I've really experienced it as blatantly as someone really shouting at me for being the cause of the lockdown.
That's it. So a lot of people ran away. That seems to be the course of action.
Well,
Yeah.
the outside environment today, just being in public spaces right now, feels already very uncomfortable, right? This is not the way we live. We're not used. I remember the first time that I had to leave my home to get some essential goods at a grocery store too. It's very anxiety inducing, right? We're not accustomed to be walking around with masks on. We're not accustomed to be waiting, keeping this physical distance from other people. I remember just feeling I was going into an aisle because I waited for somebody to leave the aisle, and then I went into that aisle, and then somebody was coming into that, and just feeling the anxiety from that. So it is already the case. The kind of status quo we are living in right now is already anxiety producing. So the fact that the two women that we just heard from, or any Asian American person right now, has to feel the additional anxiety of fearing that this person's looking at me different. I wonder if they're going to say something to me. I wonder if they're going to come at me. I mean, that's horrific. That is horrific that is the case. And it's absolutely not acceptable.
Well, Commissioner, let's say
the two women, should they still file a complaint considering that they do not know who the people were?
Sure. So that's Cristina, thank you for that question. That's a fantastic question. Sometimes people say, I wasn't physically harmed, I wasn't attacked. Are these still things that I should report? And I will say a resounding yes. People need to reach out, and there is a few reasons why. One, people still doubt that there's any such thing as anti-Asian racism. I can say for myself, I've had experiences where people have said to my face, that doesn't exist. Are you kidding me? And I have this look on my face back of, I can't believe that you're actually asking if this happens. So the documentation of this is very important so that when we are not in a time of crisis, when we are not in a time of pandemic, we know that we need to be putting resources into education, because this anti-Asian racism, it's not just coming from pandemic, it's coming from underlying misunderstandings of Asian Americans and our cultures, and what it means to be coming from different environments or different countries. So one thing I want to make very clear is that, you know, there are differences between hate crimes, which are things that the police department address, and those sorts of incidents fall within the criminal legal system. There are complaints that can get filed at the Commission on Human Rights, my agency. We are a civil law enforcement agency, so the remedies are very different. So in the criminal legal system, the types of remedies you're looking at are fines, or in some cases, liberty issues, right? Somebody loses their liberty if the infraction is you know, so severe. In my situation with a civil law enforcement arm, it is never about a liberty issue. We are never an agency that would have the jurisdiction or the ability to say, this was so severe, you lose your liberty. Instead, in our situation, we have the ability, one, to give victims some form of remedy or restitution when something happens. So that means a victim of discrimination or harassment, maybe because of their emotional distress, we might award them certain monetary damages. If it's a housing situation, we might say you must let them into the housing unit. There's a range of different remedies they can get for us. We also have the ability, in order to deter acts of discrimination or harassment, to levy civil penalties, fines up to $250,000 per discriminatory act. That is our way of punishing people for committing acts of discrimination, but also for deterring that exact type of discrimination in the public or with that particular entity, right? And then there are acts of bias or hate that might not fall at all within our jurisdiction or within the police's jurisdiction, but we still want to know about them, because again, it helps inform the basis of understanding of how government should be addressing this type of anti-Asian stigma and racism in communities, and where we need to be investing the money in government to address those issues. So, you know, one of the things that we say is report into our agency. We will let you know if you have a claim with us, if it's something that we are just documenting for purposes of taking account of acts of discrimination or harassment, or if there are times that there is overlap between an incident that could be investigated by the police department as a hate crime and can also be investigated by our office as a civil complaint of discrimination or harassment. But it's essential that people report.
Commissioner, after you report, what's the turnaround? Does it say, I have a complaint, I keep reporting, but I don't get anything? Does it take 2 months, 4 months?
So I would be very shocked if anyone's had that experience at the Commission on Human Rights, only because, you know, we know that, you know, delayed justice is in many cases not justice at all. And particularly in this time of the pandemic, what we've really done is try to expedite a lot of the complaints that come into the agency. So for anything that is COVID related, understanding that that for people, we're dealing with immediate circumstances like access to housing, like I was just saying earlier, right? Access to essential products from a grocery store. Anything that is COVID related has basically, you know, they'll get a call back within 12 to 48 hours, usually at the lower end of that time. We'll talk to somebody from intake once we determine that it's something that we actually have jurisdiction over, because sometimes we get calls where maybe it's really about a question about how to get a housing voucher or how to get something else, and we will help connect them to another city agency. But once we determine that there's actually something jurisdictional for us, then we'll send it to one of our attorneys. And now, as Rachelle was saying earlier, we've created this COVID response unit to make sure that we are expediting these types of claims. They will determine what action is necessary. Again, since we're trying to act quickly in a lot of situations, in many of the COVID-related situations, including anti-Asian bias situations, rather than filing a complaint, we will have an attorney reach out to the entity that is discriminating. And we will say, because a lot of times this is about education. You can't do this. This is against the law. Educating them on why it is against the law. And in many situations, that has been sufficient to address it, to make that entity cease and desist whatever that discriminatory action is. In the cases where they will still not listen to that, we will file a complaint and it'll go through a litigation process, just like any of the other complaints that come into our agency.
That's great.
Yeah.
And there's so much more that we want to learn. And I know that you have some upcoming events and town halls, and I urge everyone to really learn more and look into how to report and how to educate ourselves as a bystander, because I'm sure once this COVID ends, the restrictions, there will be more cases. And that's what
Oh yeah.
It looks like we're about to close up the episode so fast. But I wanted to ask one last question. So Commissioner, what is the one thing that you'd like the Filipino community to know about your work and the commission?
I want them to know that there is somebody in government, in New York City's government, that is there to help you, that is there to respond to you. One of the things that my staff are very accustomed to hearing from me when we're thinking through what are our outreach materials, what is our processes like, I'm always thinking, if something, God forbid, were to happen to my mother or one of my, titas, is this something like, would they feel comfortable calling us? Would they understand what they need to call us? So I want them to know that making sure that we are accessible to them is a huge priority. If they feel that that is not the case, they should absolutely contact us. I know that there's always ways that we could be doing better. And it's just the reminder that I'm in government now. So I serve them. I'm a public servant in New York City. And, most of my staff have that great understanding too, that we serve the public. Whenever I'm at a public event, I ask all of my staff to raise their hands. And I say, see all these people raising their hands? They work for you. But we cannot do our job effectively if you don't know who we are and you don't know how to contact us. So please take a look go to our website. I'll say it again, www.nyc.gov/human-rights. There's so much information there, including videos and information in Tagalog. We want people to be able to contact us, sign up for the bystander intervention trainings that Rachelle was talking about, other types of trainings, join our newsletter, but we want to be there for you and we want to be working with you. Thank you.
So good to know. And thank you again, Commissioner, for this in-depth look of what the New York City Commission on Human Rights is doing to help combat racial bias and discrimination in our community. A short message to our kababayan: if you ever feel unsafe in any situation, please reach out for help from your loved one, someone you trust, or the authorities. Let's all treat each other with more compassion and understanding during these challenging times. Thank you to all of our supporters and, of course, the Manhattan Neighborhood Network team. Stay safe, stay home, wear a mask, and thank you. Take care from our Makilala TV team.